What if I told you the person playing with your emotions isn't confused, they're calculated? What if every mixed signal, every hot and cold moment was never a mistake, but a strategy? There comes a point where you stop calling it complicated and start seeing it for what it really is. The late replies, the sudden distance, the moments of intense affection followed by silence. It's not randomness and it's not confusion. It's a pattern, and patterns don't lie. The truth is, when someone knows exactly when to show up and when to disappear, they're not unsure about you. They're controlling how much of themselves you get, just enough to keep you emotionally invested without ever giving you real clarity. Inconsistency is rarely accidental when it comes to emotional behavior in relationships. It often feels confusing at first, like mixed signals, mood swings, or a lack of clarity, but over time a pattern begins to emerge. One day there's warmth, attention, and deep connection. The next day there's distance, silence, or indifference. This emotional back and forth isn't just frustrating, it's psychologically powerful. It keeps you guessing, questioning, and most importantly, invested. The human mind is wired to seek stability and understanding. When something feels unpredictable, it naturally tries to solve it. So when someone gives you moments of affection and then suddenly pulls away, your brain doesn't just let it go. Instead, it becomes fixated. You start replaying conversations, analyzing small details, and wondering what changed. Was it something you said, something you did? This internal questioning creates a loop where you begin to chase clarity, hoping that if you just try a little harder, you can get back to the good version of them. That's where the emotional highs and lows become effective. The highs feel incredibly rewarding because they're not constant. When attention is given sparingly, it feels more valuable, more meaningful. A simple message, a compliment, or a moment of closeness suddenly carries more weight than it should. It's not because those actions are extraordinary, it's because they're unpredictable, and unpredictability creates emotional intensity. At the same time, the lows create anxiety and doubt. When the attention disappears, it leaves a gap that feels uncomfortable. You begin to miss the connection, not just because of the person, but because of how they made you feel during those high moments. This contrast between feeling valued and feeling ignored strengthens the emotional pull. It's no longer just about the relationship. It becomes about restoring that emotional high. Over time, this cycle can create a form of attachment that feels difficult to break. You're not just attached to the person, you're attached to the emotional roller coaster they create. You begin to associate them with both the pleasure of connection and the pain of distance, which keeps you locked in a loop of hope and disappointment. Each time they return with warmth, it reinforces the idea that the connection is real and worth holding on to, even if the inconsistency continues. Understanding this dynamic is important because it shifts your perspective. What feels like confusion often has a pattern behind it, and once you recognize the pattern, you can begin to step outside of it. Instead of chasing the next high or trying to fix the lows, you start to see the situation for what it is, an imbalance that thrives on unpredictability. Awareness breaks the illusion, and when the illusion breaks, so does the hold it has over you. One of the biggest reasons emotional manipulation works is because it triggers immediate reactions. When someone pulls away, ignores you, or suddenly changes their behavior, your first instinct is to respond emotionally. You might feel the urge to text them, ask what's wrong, or try to fix the situation as quickly as possible. In that moment, you're not thinking clearly, you're reacting to emotion driven by discomfort and uncertainty. And that's exactly where you lose control because your actions become predictable. When you stop reacting and start observing, everything begins to shift. Instead of jumping in to close the emotional gap, you take a step back and allow yourself to see what's actually happening. You begin to notice patterns rather than isolated incidents. You realize that their distance isn't random, it shows up at specific times. Maybe it happens when things start getting serious or when you begin to expect consistency. Maybe they reappear right when you're about to move on. These patterns tell a story, and that story is often more honest than their words. Observation creates space between you and your emotions. It allows you to pause instead of immediately responding, and that pause is powerful. In that space, you're no longer acting out of anxiety or fear of losing them. You're thinking, evaluating, and understanding. You begin to ask different questions, not what did I do wrong, but what are they consistently showing me? That shift alone changes everything because it moves the focus from self-blame to awareness. When you analyze instead of chase, you also stop feeding the dynamic that keeps you stuck. Chasing reinforces the idea that their behavior is acceptable, that no matter how inconsistent they are, you will always be there trying to make it work. But when you pause, you disrupt that cycle. You don't reward distance with attention. You don't respond to confusion with desperation. Instead, you create a sense of unpredictability on your side, which changes the balance of control. This doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent. It means you become intentional. You choose when and how to respond rather than reacting automatically. You protect your emotional energy instead of giving it away in moments of weakness. And most importantly, you begin to see people for who they truly are, not who you hope they will be. Over time, this approach builds a different kind of confidence. It's not loud or aggressive, it's quiet and grounded. You no longer feel the need to chase clarity because you can already see it in their actions. You stop trying to decode mixed signals because you understand that consistency speaks louder than anything else. And with that understanding comes a sense of control, not over the other person, but over yourself. Taking back control doesn't require confrontation or dramatic moves. It starts with something much simpler, the decision to pause, to observe, to think before you react. Because the moment you stop letting your emotions lead every response is the moment you stop being controlled by someone else's behavior. Detachment is often misunderstood as coldness or a lack of care, but in reality, it's a form of emotional independence. It doesn't mean you stop feeling or that you shut people out. It means you stop relying on someone else to define your worth. When you're emotionally attached in an unhealthy way, your mood, your confidence, and even your sense of peace can start depending on how another person treats you. If they give attention, you feel valued. If they pull away, you feel anxious or insecure. That dependency creates a silent imbalance where your emotional state is no longer in your control. The need for validation is what fuels this imbalance. When you look to someone else to feel important, loved, or enough, you unknowingly hand them influence over your emotions. They don't even have to try very hard. A delayed reply, a change in tone, or a lack of effort can instantly shift how you feel. And if someone is aware of this, whether consciously or not, it becomes easy for them to shape your reactions. They can give just enough to keep you interested and withdraw just enough to keep you chasing. It's not always obvious, but the effect is powerful. Detachment breaks this cycle at its core. It begins when you realize that your value isn't something another person gets to decide. Their attention is not a reward, and their absence is not a reflection of your worth. When you truly understand that, something shifts internally. You stop overanalyzing every message. You stop waiting for their approval. You stop feeling like you need to prove yourself to be treated right. Instead, you start standing in your own sense of self, where your confidence comes from within rather than from external reactions. As this shift happens, your behavior naturally changes. You no longer feel the urge to chase when someone pulls away. You don't feel compelled to fix things that you didn't break. You don't tolerate inconsistency just because you're afraid of losing them. This doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from clarity. You recognize that anything that makes you question your worth is not something you need to hold on to. What's interesting is how this affects the other person. When you stop needing their validation, they lose the leverage they once had. The things that used to trigger a reaction from you no longer work. Your silence is no longer anxious, it's intentional. Your distance is no longer a game, it's self-respect. And that shift can be confusing for someone who relied on your emotional responses to feel in control. Detachment doesn't guarantee that someone will suddenly treat you better, but it guarantees something more important. You won't accept less than you deserve. You become grounded, steady, and less affected by external inconsistency. You stop riding the emotional highs and lows created by someone else's behavior and start operating from a place of stability within yourself. Matching someone's energy is often misunderstood as playing games, but there's a clear difference between reacting emotionally and responding with self-respect. When emotions take over, your actions become impulsive. If someone ignores you, you might double text. If they become distant, you might try harder to pull them back. If they give attention, you might give even more in return, hoping to secure consistency. In all of these situations, your behavior is driven by how you feel in the moment, not by what actually serves you. And that's where imbalance begins. Responding with self-respect, on the other hand, is intentional. It's not about punishing someone or trying to make them feel what you felt. It's about maintaining your standards regardless of how they behave. When someone is inconsistent, you don't overcompensate by being extra available. When they take their time to respond, you don't feel pressured to reply instantly just to keep their attention. You naturally begin to match the level of effort they're showing, not out of spite, but out of alignment. You give what is given, and you hold back where there is a lack. This approach disrupts the dynamic because it removes emotional predictability. People who rely on emotional reactions expect a certain pattern. They expect that when they pull away, you will chase. When they return, you will welcome them without question. That cycle gives them a sense of control because they can anticipate your behavior. But when you stop responding in expected ways, that control weakens. Your calmness creates uncertainty on their side, and that uncertainty shifts the balance. What makes this powerful is the calmness behind it. There's no need for dramatic statements or confrontations. You're not announcing your change, you're simply embodying it. Your responses become measured. Your presence becomes less reactive. You're no longer trying to prove your worth through effort or attention. Instead, your actions quietly communicate that your time and energy are valuable, and they won't be given freely to inconsistent behavior. At the same time, this protects your emotional well-being. When you match energy with awareness, you stop over-investing in situations that haven't earned it. You stop giving more than what is being reciprocated, which prevents the frustration and disappointment that often comes from one-sided effort. You remain balanced, regardless of whether the other person steps up or continues their pattern. It's important to understand that this isn't about manipulation, it's about alignment. You're aligning your actions with what you're receiving rather than with what you're hoping for. You're no longer acting based on potential or promises, but on reality. And reality is revealed through consistent behavior, not occasional effort. Over time, this approach either leads to a shift or a separation. If the other person is capable of meeting you with the same level of respect and consistency, they will adjust. If they're not, their behavior will become more obvious and the connection will naturally fade. Either way, you win because you're no longer stuck in a cycle of emotional highs and lows. Matching energy with self-respect allows you to stay grounded. It keeps your dignity intact while quietly changing the dynamic around you. And in that calm, controlled space, you're no longer reacting to the game, you're stepping outside of it entirely. When someone becomes the center of your life, everything else slowly starts to revolve around them. Your mood depends on their messages, your energy shifts based on their attention, and your time gets shaped around their availability. Without realizing it, you begin to shrink your own world to make space for theirs. The problem with this isn't just emotional dependency, it's that it creates the perfect environment for manipulation to exist. When one person holds that much importance in your life, their behavior carries more weight than it should, and even the smallest inconsistency can feel overwhelming. Building a life where they're not the center changes that dynamic completely. It doesn't mean you stop caring about them. It means they are no longer the main source of your happiness, your focus, or your sense of purpose. You begin to invest in yourself again, your goals, your passions, your routines, and the things that bring you genuine fulfillment. You reconnect with parts of your life that may have been neglected, whether that's friendships, personal growth, or simply enjoying your own company without needing constant validation. As your world expands, something important happens internally. You stop feeling like you're waiting for a message, waiting for attention, waiting for clarity. Your time becomes occupied with things that actually add value to your life. So the absence of one person no longer feels like a void. Instead of checking your phone repeatedly or overthinking their behavior, your focus shifts to what you're building for yourself. That shift alone weakens the emotional grip they once had. This also changes how you perceive their actions. When your life is full, inconsistent behavior becomes more visible and less tolerable. You no longer make excuses or justify their actions because you're not emotionally dependent on the outcome. You see things as they are, not as you wish them to be. And because you're not relying on them for fulfillment, their attempts to pull you back with temporary attention or affection lose their effect. What once felt exciting or meaningful now feels minimal and insufficient. From the outside, this kind of independence is noticeable. When someone realizes they are no longer the center of your attention, it disrupts the dynamic they were used to. They may try to re-engage, to give more effort, or to regain the position they once had in your life. But the difference now is that you're no longer responding from a place of need. You're responding from a place of choice. You engage only if it aligns with your standards, not because you feel incomplete without them. Building a life like this isn't about proving a point or making someone chase you. It's about creating stability within yourself. It's about knowing that your happiness doesn't come from one person's presence, and it won't disappear with their absence. That kind of self-sufficiency makes manipulation ineffective because there's nothing to control. Your emotions are no longer tied to their actions, and your sense of worth is no longer influenced by their attention. At some point, it just clicks. You realize you were never too much. You were just giving too much to someone who didn't know how to handle real love. You stop replaying the memories. You stop making excuses for their behavior. And for the first time, you see everything clearly. The late replies weren't accidents. The mixed signals weren't confusion. The distance wasn't because they were busy. It was a choice. And in that moment, something inside you changes. You stop chasing. You stop proving. You stop shrinking yourself just to fit into someone else's uncertainty. Because you finally understand this truth. Love should never feel like a game you have to win. It should feel safe. It should feel consistent. It should feel like peace, not pressure. And the moment you choose yourself fully, unapologetically, is the moment everything that once controlled you loses its power. So if you're listening to this right now, take this as your sign. Walk away from confusion. Choose clarity. Choose peace. Choose woe. Because the right person will never make you question your worth. They'll remind you of it every single day. If this message spoke to you, don't ignore that feeling. Hit that like button because someone else needs to hear this too. Subscribe for more real, unfiltered truths about love and self-worth. And drop a comment below. What's one thing you're choosing to walk away from today? Let's grow together.